Attack of the giant pinball! Alien invasion! They want our cow!